"I'm the maid." The Duke smiled. "Not anymore." His mother already sent the announcement. The clock in the servants' hall struck 4:30, and Elellenena Whitmore opened her eyes before the final chime had faded into the darkness. Around her, the other housemaids continued sleeping, their breathing soft and rhythmic in the cramped attic room they shared. She lay still for a moment, cataloguing the familiar sounds of Thornwood Park, awakening the distant clatter from the kitchen, where cook was already stoking the fires, the creak of floorboards as the boot boy stumbled toward his duties, the wind rattling against the ill-fitted window that no one ever seemed to find time to repair. 6 years ago, she would have been sleeping in a room of her own, in a house where servants answered to her. 6 years ago, she had been Miss Elellenena Whitmore, daughter of Henry Whitmore, gentleman and scholar, a young woman with prospects and expectations, and a future that did not involve rising before dawn to light fires for other people. She pushed the thought aside with the ease of long practice. The past was a country she could not afford to visit, and self-pity was a luxury reserved for those who had time to indulge it. Eleanor dressed quickly in the darkness, her fingers finding the familiar buttons and ties without need for light. Her dress was plain grey wool, practical and warm, with a white apron that she tied with precise movements. Her hair she pinned severely, twisting the honey-brown mass into a tight knot at the base of her skull. In the tiny mirror that hung on the wall, spotted with age and barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom, she checked that nothing was out of place. The face that looked back at her was composed, unremarkable, designed to attract no attention whatsoever. Good. Invisibility was her armor, and she had learned to wear it well. She made her way down the narrow servants' stair, her footsteps quiet on the worn wood. Thornwood Park was a vast estate, one of the finest in Derbyshire, and even after 3 years, Eleanor still sometimes marvelled at its grandeur. The family wing alone contained more rooms than her father's entire house, and the public rooms were filled with treasures that would have made Papa weep with scholarly joy, paintings by masters, books from centuries past, artifacts from every corner of the world, collected by generations of wealthy Harcourts. Not that she ever examined any of it closely. Servants did not gawk at their surroundings. Servants kept their eyes downcast and their thoughts to themselves. The kitchen was warm and bright when she arrived, a welcome contrast to the cold corridors above. Mrs. Briggs, the cook, looked up from the dough she was kneading and nodded in greeting. "Up early again, Miss Whitmore. You'll wear yourself to shadows, you will." "I prefer to be prepared," Eleanor said. It was her standard response, offered with a small smile that invited no further discussion. "Well, there's tea in the pot if you want it. Fresh made not 10 minutes ago." "Thank you, Mrs. Briggs." Eleanor poured herself a cup and stood near the fire, letting the warmth seep into her bones while she mentally reviewed the day's tasks. The upstairs fires would need lighting. That was her first duty each morning, to ensure the family rooms were warm before anyone rose. Then the dusting, the polishing, the endless round of tasks that kept a great house functioning. Today, there was also the linen inventory to complete, and Mrs. Bell had mentioned wanting to discuss the winter cleaning schedule. It was a life of routine, of predictability, of safety. If it was not the life Eleanor had once imagined for herself, well, it was a life nonetheless. She had food and shelter and respectable employment. Many women in her situation had far less. She finished her tea and collected her supplies, the coal scuttle, the brush and pan for ashes, the matches in their box, and began her rounds. The family wing was silent at this hour, the Dowager Duchess being the only resident, and she not inclined to rise before 9. Eleanor moved through the rooms like a ghost, her practiced movements disturbing nothing, leaving only warmth in her wake. The drawing room, the morning room, the dining room that sat empty most days, the library. She paused at the library door, her hand on the handle. The library was her secret indulgence, the one place in Thornwood Park where she allowed herself to remember who she had been. She was permitted to clean it, of course, permitted to dust the shelves and polish the tables, but sometimes when she was certain no one was watching, she would let her fingers trail across the spines of the books, reading the titles like old friends. Sometimes she would open one, just for a moment, and breathe in the scent of paper and leather and knowledge. It was foolish. It was dangerous. If anyone caught her reading, there would be questions, and questions led to truths she preferred to keep buried. But the library called to her nonetheless, and this morning she allowed herself the small defiance of lingering at the door a moment longer than necessary before pushing it open. The room was cold, the fire having died completely overnight, and Eleanor set to work with efficient movements. Rake the ashes, lay the new fire, strike the match, watch the flames catch. She was just brushing the hearth clean when a voice spoke from the shadows. "You're very quiet." Eleanor's heart stopped. Her brush clattered against the stone, and she scrambled to her feet, spinning toward the source of the voice, with her pulse hammering in her throat. A man sat in the wing-back chair by the window, so still that she had taken him for part of the furniture in the darkness. He was dressed informally, in shirt-sleeves and waistcoat, his cravat loosened and his dark hair dishevelled. The first grey light of dawn illuminated his face as he leaned forward, sharp features, grey eyes, a mouth that might have been handsome if it had ever learned to smile. The Duke of Thornwood, who was supposed to be in London, who had not set foot in this house for 8 months, who was staring at her with an expression she could not read. "Your Grace." Eleanor dropped into a curtsy, her mind racing. "Forgive me. I did not know you had arrived. I would not have intruded." "You haven't intruded. I've been sitting here all night." He gestured vaguely toward the window, where the sky was lightening from black to grey. "Couldn't sleep. Didn't want to wake the household. I thought I would wait until a civilized hour to announce my presence." His voice was rougher than she remembered, as though he had been doing something other than sleeping during those long, dark hours. Drinking, perhaps there was an empty glass on the table beside him, and a decanter that looked considerably less full than it should. "Shall I bring you coffee, Your Grace? Or tea?" "No. Stay a moment." He was looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You're the one who lights the fires." "Yes, Your Grace. I am the head housemaid." "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, Your Grace." He nodded slowly, as though this information required careful consideration. "And before that?" Eleanor felt her shoulders stiffen. It was not an appropriate question. Masters did not inquire into the personal histories of their servants, but refusing to answer a duke was not an option available to her. "I was in service elsewhere, Your Grace." "Where?" "London. A merchant's household." It was not a lie, precisely. She had worked briefly for a merchant family before finding her position at Thornwood, a desperate few months of drudgery that she preferred not to remember. But it was not the whole truth either, and she could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight, as though he knew she was hiding something. "You speak very well for a housemaid." "My mother believed in education, Your Grace." "Did she?" It was not a question. His grey eyes narrowed slightly, and Eleanor felt a flutter of panic in her chest. He was seeing too much, looking too closely. In another moment he would ask more questions, and she would have to either lie outright or reveal the truth about her past, and neither option appealed to her. She dropped her gaze to the floor, retreating into the safety of civility. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" A long pause. She could feel him studying her, weighing her, and she kept her expression carefully blank. "No," he said finally. "That will be all." "Your Grace." She curtsied again and gathered her supplies, forcing herself to move at a normal pace, rather than fleeing as every instinct demanded. At the door she paused, some inexplicable impulse making her glance back. He was watching her still, silhouetted against the brightening window, and for just a moment their eyes met. Something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or curiosity, or simply the strange intimacy of two people awake in the grey hours before dawn, when the rest of the world slept. Then Eleanor dropped her gaze and slipped through the door, and the moment shattered like ice on a winter pond. The household erupted into chaos with the news of the Duke's arrival. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, received the information with the tightly controlled panic of a woman who had devoted her life to preparedness and found herself nonetheless unprepared. Rooms that had been closed for months needed airing. Fires needed lighting in the family wing. Cook needed to be informed that the Duke would expect proper meals, not the simple fare that suited the Dowager. "And no warning," Mrs. Bell muttered as she hurried through the servants' hall, her keys jangling at her waist. "Not a word, not a letter, just appears in the middle of the night like a ghost. What is the world coming to when a duke cannot be bothered to inform his own household of his movements?" Eleanor listened and said nothing, as was appropriate. But she found her thoughts returning again and again to that dark library, to the man who had sat alone through the long hours of the night, to the rough edge in his voice that suggested wounds she could not begin to imagine. She had seen the Duke only a handful of times during her years at Thornwood. He came rarely to the country estate, preferring to conduct his business from London, and when he did visit, he kept largely to himself. The servants spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him cold, distant, nothing like the laughing young man he had apparently been before his father's death. Some said he was heartless. Others said his heart had simply frozen over. Eleanor had no opinion on the matter. It was not her place to have opinions about her employers, but she could not forget the way he had looked at her, as though he was seeing past the grey dress and the severe hair and the downcast eyes to something beneath, as though he recognized her. It was unsettling. It was dangerous. It was, she admitted to herself in the privacy of her own thoughts, thrilling in a way she could not afford. The Dowager Duchess descended to breakfast at her usual hour, apparently unsurprised to find her son waiting for her in the dining room. From her position in the hallway, where she was supervising the footman's service, Eleanor watched the reunion unfold. "James?" The Dowager was a small woman, bird-boned and silver-haired, with eyes that missed nothing and a tongue that spared no one. "I wondered when you would show your face. How long has it been? 8 months? 9? I had begun to wonder if I still had a son, or if you had simply transformed into a figment of my imagination." "Mother." The Duke rose and kissed her cheek, his expression carefully neutral. "You're looking well." "I'm looking old, and you're looking like you haven't slept in a week. Sit down and eat something, your skin and bones." "I'm perfectly healthy." "You're 32 years old and unmarried, which is the opposite of healthy. But we'll discuss that later." The Dowager settled into her chair and allowed a footman to pour her tea. "First, you can explain why you fled London in the middle of the season like a criminal escaping the law." A muscle twitched in the Duke's jaw. "I have not fled." "No? Then what would you call appearing at your own house in the dead of night without warning or luggage or even a valet to attend you?" "A strategic retreat." "From what?" The Duke was silent for a long moment. Eleanor busied herself adjusting a candlestick that did not need adjusting, her ears straining to catch every word. "You know from what, Mother?" "I'm sure I don't." "The announcement. The one you placed in the Times without my knowledge or consent." The Dowager sipped her tea with perfect composure. "Ah, that. Yes, that. My supposed engagement to Lady Sophia Pembroke, which came as a considerable surprise to Lady Sophia, to her parents, to all of society, and most especially to me. I thought it would be simpler if you didn't have to trouble yourself with the details." "The details?" The Duke's voice had gone very quiet, very controlled. You mean such details as whether or not I had actually proposed to the woman, whether I had any intention of marrying her, whether I had even spoken to her more than twice in my entire life. She comes from an excellent family. Her dowry is substantial. She's young enough to give you heirs and old enough to manage a household. I fail to see the objection. The objection, Mother, is that I do not love her. I do not want to marry her, and I will not be manipulated into an engagement by my own mother's machinations. Love. The Dowager made the word sound like a distasteful foreign concept. Your father and I did not love each other when we married, and we managed perfectly well. You managed to make each other miserable for 30 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor saw the Dowager's composure flicker just for an instant before she recovered. I want you to be happy, James. Then stop trying to marry me off to women I cannot stand. And who could you stand? In 7 years you haven't shown the slightest interest in any eligible young woman. You avoid balls, you flee dinner parties, you treat every matchmaking mamma in London as though she carries the plague. How am I supposed to see you settled if you refuse to cooperate? Perhaps, the Duke said, rising from the table. I have no wish to be settled. Perhaps I prefer my life exactly as it is. Alone? Miserable? Hiding in the country because you cannot face society? I am not hiding. I am taking a respite from your interference. He moved toward the door, and Eleanor quickly stepped back into the shadows. I will be here for a fortnight, perhaps longer. During that time I expect no matchmaking, no schemes, no surprise announcements. Is that understood? Perfectly, the Dowager said, though I make no promises. The Duke paused in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. Mother, I mean it. Leave me in peace. When have I ever done that, darling? He left without answering, and Eleanor heard his footsteps receding down the corridor, heavy and deliberate, the walk of a man carrying weights she could not see. The Dowager sat alone at the breakfast table, her tea growing cold, her expression thoughtful. After a long moment, she looked up directly at the spot where Eleanor stood in the shadows. Miss Whitmore, come here. Eleanor stepped forward, her heart sinking. She should not have been listening. She should have retreated the moment the conversation turned personal. Now she would be dismissed, and she would have to find new employment, and, "Stop looking so terrified, girl. I'm not going to eat you." The Dowager gestured to a chair. "Sit." "Your Grace, I couldn't—" "Sit." Eleanor sat. The Dowager studied her for a long moment, those sharp old eyes taking in every detail of Eleanor's appearance. "You were the one who found him this morning, in the library?" "Yes, Your Grace." "What did he say to you?" "Very little, Your Grace. He asked how long I had worked here. I answered and then departed." "He asked about you specifically?" Eleanor hesitated. "He seemed curious about my manner of speaking." "Ah." A small, satisfied smile crossed the Dowager's face. "Yes, I thought he might notice." "Your Grace?" "Never mind." "You may go." Eleanor rose and curtsied, thoroughly confused. But before she reached the door, the Dowager spoke again. "Miss Whitmore, my son is a difficult man. He has been hurt badly, and he protects himself by pushing everyone away. But he is not cruel, and he is not cold. He has simply forgotten how to feel." Eleanor did not know how to respond to this. "Yes, Your Grace." "I wonder," the Dowager said softly, almost to herself, "what it would take to remind him." The next few days settled into a tense routine. The Duke spent most of his time in the library, reading or staring out the window, or simply sitting in silence. He took his meals alone, declined all invitations to join his mother for tea or cards or conversation, and spoke to the servants only when absolutely necessary. The household moved around him like water around a stone, accommodating his presence without engaging with it. Eleanor found herself assigned to the library more often than coincidence could explain. Mrs. Bell would send her to dust the shelves or polish the tables or tend the fire, tasks that could easily have been given to any of the lower maids. Each time, she entered with her head down and her manner professional, intending to complete her work without drawing attention. Each time, the Duke watched her. He never spoke, never approached, simply sat in his chair by the window and followed her movements with those grey eyes, his expression unreadable. It should have been unnerving. It was unnerving, but there was something in his gaze that felt less like scrutiny and more like curiosity, as though she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Eleanor told herself it meant nothing. She was a servant, and he was a duke, and the distance between them was vast and uncrossable. Whatever he saw when he looked at her, it could not be what she secretly feared he saw, the ghost of the gentlewoman she had once been, the truth she had buried so carefully beneath years of service. But still she felt his eyes on her, and still she wondered. On the fourth day, he spoke. "That book on the third shelf, the red leather one with the gold lettering. Have you read it?" Eleanor was dusting the mantelpiece, her back to him, and she froze at the sound of his voice. For a wild moment, she considered pretending she hadn't heard. But that would be absurd. The room was silent, his voice perfectly clear, and so she turned, carefully keeping her expression neutral. "Which book, Your Grace?" He gestured. "The one you keep looking at. Every time you come in here, your eyes go to it. You think I haven't noticed, but I have." Heat flooded her cheeks. She had been so careful, so certain that her small indulgence went unobserved. To learn that he had been watching, cataloguing her glances, noting her interest. "I was admiring the binding, Your Grace. The craftsmanship is exceptional." "Is it?" He rose from his chair and crossed to the shelf, pulling down the book in question. "Let's see. Gulliver's Travels, by Jonathan Swift. First edition, if I'm not mistaken. My father was quite proud of it." He turned the book over in his hands, examining the spine. "The craftsmanship is adequate, I suppose, but I don't think that's why you keep looking at it." "Your Grace, you've read it, haven't you?" It was not a question. Eleanor stood very still, her heart pounding, searching for a lie that would satisfy him. But none came, and the silence stretched between them, and finally she heard herself say, "Yes, a long time ago." "Did you enjoy it?" She stopped, swallowed, started again. "I thought it was brilliant and terrible. Satire dressed as fantasy. Mr. Swift held a mirror up to humanity and showed us our ugliest reflections, and somehow made us laugh at the sight." The words came out before she could stop them, flowing from some long-sealed reservoir inside her. She heard them as though from a great distance, and felt the blood drain from her face. What was she doing? Servants did not offer literary opinions to dukes. Servants did not reveal that they could read at all, let alone analyze texts with the fluency of a scholar's daughter. She dropped her gaze to the floor, waiting for the dismissal that must surely follow. Instead, the Duke laughed. It was a rusty sound, as though the mechanism had gone unused for too long and forgotten how to function properly. But it was genuine, she could hear that much, and when she dared to look up, she found him smiling. Not the polite, empty smile of a man performing social niceties. A real smile that reached his grey eyes and transformed his sharp features into something approaching warmth. "That is exactly right," he said. "Brilliant and terrible. I've never heard it described so perfectly." He held the book out to her. "Take it." "Your Grace, I couldn't." "Consider it a reward for honesty. God knows I hear little enough of that." His smile faded slightly, taking on a wry edge. "Everyone around me speaks in careful phrases. calculated to please or manipulate or conceal. But you actually said what you thought. Do you know how rare that is?" Eleanor stared at the book in his outstretched hand, her mind spinning. This was wrong. This was dangerous. If she accepted, it would be a step across a line she could never uncross, an acknowledgement of the strange connection building between them. But she wanted that book, had wanted it for 3 years, every time she entered this library and saw it gleaming on the shelf. And he was offering it to her freely, with no conditions attached, simply because she had been foolish enough to tell the truth. She took the book. "Thank you, Your Grace." "James," she looked up sharply. "My name is James. When we're alone, you may use it." "Your Grace, that would be inappropriate, irregular, probably." He shrugged, turning back toward his chair. "But I am tired of formality, Miss Whitmore. I am tired of distance and pretense and the endless performance of my position. For a fortnight at least, I would like to be simply a man. And I would like you to be simply a woman. Can you do that?" "I don't understand what you're asking." "Neither do I, entirely." He settled into his chair and gazed at her with an expression she could not interpret. "But I find myself curious about you, Miss Whitmore, about the housemaid who speaks like a lady and reads swift and looks at the world with eyes that see more than they should. I would like to know your story." "I don't have a story, Your Grace." "Everyone has a story." He leaned back, crossing his long legs at the ankle. "The question is whether they're willing to tell it." Eleanor clutched the book to her chest like a shield. "I should return to my duties." "Of course." He waved a hand in dismissal, but his eyes never left hers. "We'll talk again, Miss Whitmore. I suspect there's quite a lot we have to say to each other." She fled. There was no other word for it, and did not stop until she had reached the safety of her small attic room. There, with the door closed and her back pressed against the rough wood, she allowed herself to breathe. The book was warm in her hands, the leather soft with age. She opened it to the first page, where an inscription read, "To my son James, on his 10th birthday. May you always seek out the truth, no matter how terrible it proves to be. Your loving father." Eleanor closed the book and pressed it to her heart, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself weep. The days that followed were a strange kind of torture. Eleanor went about her duties as she always had: the fires, the dusting, the linen inventory, the 1,000 small tasks that kept a great house running. But beneath the routine, something had shifted. She was aware of the Duke James. Her treacherous mind whispered in a way that felt almost physical. When she passed him in a corridor, she felt the brush of his gaze like a touch. When she heard his voice in the distance, her heart stumbled in her chest. It was madness. It was impossible. And yet she could not seem to stop. They talked again, in the library, in stolen moments when no one else was near. He asked her about books and ideas, and her opinions on everything from poetry to politics. She answered cautiously at first, trying to maintain the fiction of her servile position, but he had a way of drawing her out, of making her forget herself. Before she knew it, she was debating the merits of Mr. Wordsworth's verse with the Duke, was laughing at his dry observations about society, was losing herself in conversations that lasted hours and felt like minutes. He told her about his father, the debts that had been discovered after the old Duke's death, the near ruin of the family, the years of careful work to rebuild what had been lost. He told her about London, about the endless parade of fortune hunters and matchmaking mamas, about how exhausting it was to be wanted only for what he could provide. He told her things, she suspected, that he had never told anyone, and she told him nothing. She held her secrets close. Even as she felt them straining against their bonds, even as the lies tasted increasingly bitter on her tongue, She was not ready to trust, not ready to risk the fragile equilibrium of her existence, not ready to believe that anything good could come from revealing the truth. The Dowager watched them with knowing eyes, but said nothing. Mrs. Bell watched with worried eyes, and also said nothing. The rest of the household watched with curious eyes, and whispered among themselves, but Eleanor pretended not to notice. And the days passed, and the strange tension built, and Eleanor began to fear that something was about to break. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Eleanor was in the library. She seemed to spend half her time there now, finding excuses to dust shelves that were already immaculate when the Dowager swept in without warning. "James, there you are." The Duke looked up from his book, his expression wary. "Mother, I have news." The Dowager's face was alight with an expression that made Eleanor's stomach clench with unease. "Wonderful news." "Somehow I doubt that. I have solved everything." "Solved what, precisely?" "Your engagement, of course." The Dowager waved a hand as though this should have been obvious. "The scandal with Lady Sophia has been handled. I have retracted the original announcement and replaced it with a new one." The Duke's knuckles went white around his book. "Mother, what have you done?" "I have secured your happiness, darling. You may thank me later." She turned toward the door. "Miss Whitmore, attend me." Eleanor had been standing frozen by the bookshelf, hoping desperately that she might somehow be overlooked. But the Dowager's sharp eyes had found her, and there was no escape. She stepped forward, her heart hammering. "Your Grace? Come here. Both of you, actually." The Dowager gestured impatiently. "This concerns you both." The Duke rose slowly, his face like thunder. "Mother, whatever scheme you've concocted this time, it's not a scheme, it's a solution." The Dowager's smile was serene, immovable. "I have announced your engagement, James, the correct one this time, to a woman who is worthy of you. And who might that be? Why, Miss Whitmore, of course." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her, as though she was falling through endless empty space with nothing to catch her. This could not be happening. This was not real. This was some bizarre dream from which she would wake at any moment. "Miss Whitmore," she heard herself say, her voice strange and distant, "is the housemaid. Your Grace, I'm the maid." The Duke looked at her, and despite everything, despite the chaos of the moment, despite the impossibility of what his mother had just announced, despite the 1,000 reasons why this was wrong and inappropriate and utterly mad, he smiled. "Not any more," he said. "What?" "You're not the maid any more. My mother has already sent the announcement." Eleanor stared at him, then at the Dowager, then back at him. "This is insane. You cannot. I am a servant, Your Grace. I scrub floors. I light fires. I cannot." "You are the daughter of Henry Whitmore," the Dowager said calmly. "Gentleman and scholar, graduate of Oxford, author of 3 respected treatises on classical antiquities. You were educated in Latin, Greek, French, and Italian. You play the pianoforte passably well, and sing rather better than that. You were presented at court at the age of 17, and were widely considered one of the most promising young ladies of your season." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you—" "Your mother was my dear friend, Miss Whitmore. We came out together nearly 40 years ago. I was there when she married your father. I was there when you were born." The Dowager's voice softened. "And I wept when I learned what had happened to you both, when I heard that Mary had died and her daughter had vanished, when I could not find you, no matter how hard I searched. You knew," the words came out as a whisper, "all this time, you knew who I was. I recognized you the moment you applied for the position. You have your mother's eyes." The dowager reached out and took Eleanor's cold hands in her own. "I wanted to help you, child, but I knew you would not accept charity, so I gave you employment instead, and I watched, and I waited." "Waited for what?" "For you to be ready to reclaim your life." The dowager glanced at her son, who was watching the exchange with an expression of dawning understanding. "And for James to find someone worthy of his heart." "Mother," the Duke's voice was rough, "did you plan this? The conversations in the library, the time we've spent together, was all of it some elaborate manipulation? I introduced you to a remarkable young woman and gave you the opportunity to discover each other. What happened next was entirely your own doing." The dowager smiled. "But I will confess that I hoped." Eleanor pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself as though trying to hold the pieces of her shattered world together. "You hoped. You hoped that I would, that we would, Your Grace. This is madness. Whatever your intentions, whatever you believe you've observed between your son and me, it cannot. I am a servant. I have been a servant for 6 years. I am not fit to be a duchess." "You are exactly fit," the Duke said quietly. "You are brilliant and kind and honest and brave. You see the world clearly and speak your mind fearlessly. You are the only woman I have ever met who looks at me and sees a man instead of a title." He stepped toward her, his grey eyes intent. "I know this is sudden. I know it is unexpected. But I have spent every day of the past week falling—" "Don't." Eleanor held up a hand, stopping him. "Please don't say it. Whatever you think you feel, it isn't real. It's proximity and curiosity and the novelty of a servant who can quote Swift. In a month you'll wonder what you ever saw in me, and I'll be ruined, and—" "The announcement has already been sent," the dowager said. "It will appear in tomorrow's Times. By this time next week, all of London will know that James Edward Harcourt, Duke of Thornwood, is engaged to Miss Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. Then retract it. Send another announcement. Say it was a mistake. If I do that," the dowager said gently, "you will be ruined anyway. A broken engagement to a duke, there is no recovering from such a scandal. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your chances of respectable employment eliminated." She spread her hands. "I'm sorry, my dear, but the only way forward is through." Eleanor looked between them, the dowager with her serene certainty, the Duke with his intent grey gaze, and felt a hysterical laugh building in her chest. "This cannot be happening." "And yet it is." The Duke took another step toward her. "Eleanor, Miss Whitmore, I know this is not how either of us imagined this would unfold. But I meant what I said. I have spent this week discovering a woman of extraordinary depth and intelligence and courage. A woman who makes me laugh for the first time in years. A woman I am not willing to lose." He held out his hand, palm up, waiting. "Give me a chance. Give us a chance. Let me prove to you that this is real." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand. It was a good hand. She thought absurdly strong and elegant, the hand of a man who had worked to rebuild his family's fortunes, who had carried responsibilities that would have crushed a lesser person. A duke's hand, reaching for a housemaid. "I need—" She swallowed hard. "I need time to think." "Of course." He lowered his hand, but his gaze never wavered. "Take all the time you need." Eleanor fled. Her room in the servants' quarters was small and cold and utterly familiar. She had slept in this bed for 3 years. She had stared at these walls, had traced the cracks in the plaster, had memorized every creaking floorboard and draughty corner. It was not much, but it was hers, the only thing that was truly hers, and now even that was being taken away. She sat on the narrow bed with Swift's book in her lap, running her fingers over the worn leather. The inscription blurred as tears filled her eyes. "May you always seek out the truth, no matter how terrible it proves to be." The truth. What was the truth? The truth was that she had spent 6 years burying herself, hiding the person she had once been under layers of subservience and invisibility. The truth was that she had convinced herself she wanted nothing, needed nothing, was nothing because wanting and needing and being had led her family to ruin. The truth was that she had spent the last week more alive than she had felt in years. Talking to James to the Duke, she had felt herself unfolding, like a flower that had forgotten it could bloom. She had laughed, she had argued, she had allowed herself to be seen. And it terrified her, because if she let herself want this, let herself believe in this, then she was vulnerable again. Open to loss and heartbreak and the crushing weight of disappointment. The walls she had so carefully constructed would crumble, and she would be left defenseless against a world that had already hurt her so badly. But what was the alternative? A life of safety and shadows, invisible and alone, watching from the margins as others lived and loved? Was that really living at all? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Whitmore?" Mrs. Bell's voice, worried and uncertain. "Are you all right, dear?" Eleanor wiped her eyes and crossed to open the door. The housekeeper stood in the corridor, her kind face creased with concern. "I heard what happened. The announcement." Mrs. Bell shook her head slowly. "I always knew there was more to you than you let on, child. But I never imagined—" "Neither did I." Eleanor laughed, though it came out somewhat wet. "Mrs. Bell, what am I supposed to do?" "That's not for me to say." The housekeeper's eyes were soft. "But I'll tell you this. I knew your mother. Not well, but enough. She was a good woman, Eleanor, a kind woman, and she would have wanted you to be happy. I don't know how to be happy. I've forgotten. Then perhaps it's time to learn again." Mrs. Bell reached out and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "The Duke is a good man. Cold on the surface, perhaps, but there's warmth beneath if you dig for it. And the way he looks at you—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Well, I've said enough. Just don't dismiss this out of hand, dear. Miracles don't come around twice." She left Eleanor standing in the doorway, the book still clutched to her chest, staring at nothing. It was nearly midnight when Eleanor finally made her decision. She did not know if it was courage or madness that propelled her feet down the corridor, through the silent house, toward the family wing. She only knew that she could not spend another night in uncertainty, could not face another dawn without resolution. The Duke's door was closed, a thin line of light visible beneath it. He was awake then, reading perhaps, or staring at the ceiling as she had been, turning the impossible situation over and over in his mind. She raised her hand to knock, and then the door opened, and he was there. "Eleanor!" He was dressed informally, his coat and cravat discarded, his hair dishevelled as though he had been running his hands through it. His grey eyes went wide at the sight of her. "What are you? Is something wrong?" "No. Yes. I don't know." She realized she was still holding the book and held it up as though it explained everything. "You gave me this." "I did." "Why?" He blinked. "Because you wanted it. Because you looked at it with such longing every time you came into the library, and I wanted to see you smile." "That's a terrible reason." "Is it?" "Yes." "No. I don't—" She broke off, shaking her head. "I am not good at this. I have spent so long being invisible, being nothing, that I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know how to accept gifts or kindness or—" She gestured vaguely. "Or proposals, apparently." "It wasn't exactly a proposal, more of a fait accompli, thanks to my mother." "But you didn't protest. You smiled." "I did." "Why?" James leaned against the doorframe, his expression softening. "Because for the first time in 7 years, my mother did something I actually wanted her to do. even if she did it in the most absurd way possible. He reached out, very slowly, and touched her cheek. I was falling in love with you, Eleanor. I think I started falling the moment you looked me in the eye and told me Swift was brilliant and terrible. My mother simply expedited matters. Eleanor's breath caught. You don't know me. Not really. You know the woman I've been pretending to be for the past week. The woman who quotes poetry and argues about politics. But there's so much more. So much darkness. So much fear. Then show me. His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle as a whisper. Show me the darkness. Show me the fear. Show me everything you've been hiding, and let me love you anyway. What if you can't? What if I can? She stood on the precipice, trembling. Behind her was the safety of her old life, the walls, the shadows, the careful invisibility that had protected her for so long. Before her was something terrifying and unknown, a leap into darkness with no guarantee of landing. But James was there, reaching for her as he had reached in the library, offering his hand, his heart, his trust. And for the first time in 6 years, Eleanor chose to reach back. "Teach me," she whispered. "Teach me how to be seen again." His smile was like sunrise. "It would be my honor." And there in the doorway, with the night dark around them, and the future stretching ahead uncertain and vast, the Duke of Thornwood kissed the woman who had been his housemaid, and Elellenena Whitmore began, at last, to remember how to live. The morning after everything changed, Eleanor woke in a bed that was not her own. For a disorienting moment, she did not know where she was. The mattress was too soft, the sheets too fine, the light filtering through the curtains too golden and warm. She lay still, her heart racing, trying to piece together the fragments of memory that would explain this strangeness. Then it came back to her, all of it, and she sat up sharply, clutching the unfamiliar coverlet to her chest. She was in a guest chamber in the family wing of Thornwood Park. The Dowager had insisted on moving her there last night, after the kiss in the doorway, after James had finally released her with a promise to see her at breakfast. "You cannot remain in the servants' quarters," the Dowager had said, her tone brooking no argument. "Not now, not any more." Eleanor had been too dazed to protest. She had allowed herself to be led through the silent house, had accepted the nightgown that appeared as if by magic, had climbed into this vast bed and stared at the canopy above her until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Now, in the unforgiving light of morning, the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was engaged to a duke. The announcement was in the Times. By now, all of London knew. By now, the gossip would have begun. Who is this Miss Whitmore? Where did she come from? How did a nobody capture the most eligible bachelor in England? And when they learned the truth, when they discovered that the Duke's intended had spent the last 6 years scrubbing floors and lighting fires, the scandal would be immense. Devastating. The kind of scandal that ruined not just individuals, but entire families. What had she done? A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Before she could respond, it opened to admit a young woman in a maid's uniform, one of the housemaids Eleanor had supervised just yesterday, carrying a tray laden with tea and toast. "Good morning, miss." The girl, Sarah, her name was Sarah, bobbed a curtsy, her eyes wide with barely concealed curiosity. "Her Grace said to bring you breakfast and help you dress." "Sarah?" Eleanor's voice came out strained. "You don't have to. I can manage perfectly well on my own." "Her Grace was most insistent, miss." Sarah set the tray on the bedside table, her movements careful and deliberate. "She said you're to have everything proper now. Said you're to be treated as befits your station." "My station." Eleanor wanted to laugh, or perhaps cry. Yesterday her station had been the same as Sarah's. Yesterday she had been the one bringing trays and helping ladies dress. The reversal was so complete, so disorienting, that she felt as though she had stepped through a looking-glass into a world where all the rules had changed. "Sarah, please. I don't know how to do this." The young maid paused in her work, turning to look at Eleanor with an expression of unexpected sympathy. "If I may say so, miss, you were always kind to us, kinder than you needed to be. The other girls, we always thought there was something different about you, something above." She ducked her head, suddenly shy. "We're glad for you, miss. Truly, you deserve nice things." Eleanor's eyes burned. "I don't know about that." "I do." Sarah straightened her shoulders, seeming to find confidence from somewhere. "Now, Her Grace has sent up some dresses for you to try. They're from her own wardrobe, but she says the seamstress can alter them quick enough. Shall I show you?" There was nothing to do but nod and allow herself to be swept along by the current. An hour later, Eleanor descended the main staircase in a gown of pale blue muslin that had been hastily taken in at the waist and let out at the hem. It was finer than anything she had worn in years, the fabric soft against her skin, the cut elegant and flattering. Her hair had been styled by Sarah's uncertain but willing hands into something approximating a fashionable arrangement, with soft curls framing her face instead of the severe knot she had worn for so long. She felt like an imposter. The dining room was bright with morning sunlight when she entered. James rose immediately from his seat at the table, his eyes sweeping over her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. "You look beautiful. I look like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. Those are someone else's clothes, but you make them look better than their original owner ever did." "I heard that," the dowager said from her position at the head of the table, "and I'll have you know that gown was the height of fashion in its day." "Its day being approximately 15 years ago," James said, pulling out a chair for Eleanor. "But the colour suits her. We'll need to commission an entire wardrobe, of course. I'll send for Madame Beaumont from London." Eleanor sank into the offered chair, overwhelmed. "That isn't necessary." "It is absolutely necessary. You're to be a duchess. You cannot go about in altered hand-me-downs, however becoming they may be." "James is right," the dowager agreed. "We have much to do, and precious little time to do it. The announcement will bring visitors, curiosity-seekers and well-wishers alike. We must be prepared." "Visitors?" Eleanor's stomach clenched. "Already?" "The neighbourhood will call within the week, I expect, and once word spreads to London, we can expect a veritable invasion." The dowager sipped her tea with perfect composure. "Lady Ashworth will be first, mark my words. She's been desperate to marry her daughter to James for years. She'll want to inspect the competition." "Mother," James's voice held a warning note, "I'm simply being realistic, darling. Society will not welcome Eleanor with open arms. She must be prepared for scrutiny, for questions, for those who will seek to expose any weakness." The dowager's gaze settled on Eleanor, not unkindly. "You were raised a lady, my dear, and that will serve you well. But you have also spent 6 years in service, and there will be those who cannot forgive that. We must decide how to handle the inevitable questions." "You mean we must decide how much to lie?" "I mean we must decide how to present the truth in the most favourable light." Eleanor set down her fork, her appetite vanishing. "What would you suggest, Your Grace? That we pretend I wasn't a housemaid? That we invent some fictional history of quiet gentility in the country?" "We could," the dowager said thoughtfully. "It would be simpler." "No." James's voice was firm. "We will not lie about who Eleanor is or what she has done. There is no shame in honest work, and I will not have my future wife begin our marriage with deception." Eleanor looked at him, something warm blooming in her chest despite her anxiety. "You say that now, but when the gossip starts—" "Let them gossip. Let them whisper and speculate and clutch their pearls in horror. I don't care what society thinks." He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip strong and sure. "I care what you think, and I care what we build together. The rest is noise." "A pretty sentiment," the Dowager said, "but noise can be damaging. We must at least control the narrative. Eleanor's father was a respected scholar, her family well connected before their misfortunes. That much is true and can be verified. We will emphasize her education, her accomplishments, her breeding. The service will be mentioned only if directly asked, and then as a testament to her character, a gentlewoman who chose honest work over dependence or disgrace." "And if they ask why I was working in your own household?" Eleanor asked. "That will seem suspicious, as though this entire engagement was manufactured." "It was manufactured," James said dryly. "By my mother." "Yes, but they needn't know that." The Dowager waved a dismissive hand. "We will say that I recognized Eleanor when she came to seek employment, that I took her in out of affection for her late mother, and that nature took its course when my son finally deigned to visit his own estate. That's remarkably close to the truth. The best deceptions always are." The Dowager smiled. "Now, eat your breakfast, both of you. We have a great deal of work to do." The following days blurred together in a whirlwind of preparations. Madame Beaumont arrived from London with 2 assistants and enough fabric samples to outfit a small army. Eleanor spent hours being measured, pinned, and draped in silks and satins that cost more than she had earned in a year of service. Every time she protested the expense, James simply smiled and told her to choose whatever she liked. "I have more money than I know what to do with," he said, when she pressed the issue. "Thanks to 7 years of having nothing to spend it on but investments and improvements. Let me enjoy spoiling you. I don't need to be spoiled, but I need to spoil you. Consider it a favor to me." It was, Eleanor reflected, remarkably difficult to argue with a man who framed his generosity as a personal necessity. Beyond the wardrobe, there were lessons to be absorbed, or rather, relearned. The Dowager took charge of Eleanor's education with the determination of a general preparing for war. There were dancing masters to ensure her skills remained sharp, tutors to refresh her French and Italian, endless discussions of which families were aligned with whom, which scandals were too fresh to mention, which subjects were safe for polite conversation. "You knew all of this once," the Dowager reminded her, when Eleanor expressed frustration at the complexity of social navigation. "It will come back to you. I knew it at 17. I'm 24 now, and I've spent the intervening years thinking about chimney maintenance and linen inventories, which makes you considerably more interesting than the vapid debutantes who think of nothing but bonnets and bows. Use that to your advantage." Through it all, James remained a steady presence at her side. He joined her for meals, sat with her during fittings, walked with her through the winter gardens when the endless preparations threatened to overwhelm her. In stolen moments between obligations, they continued the conversations that had begun in the library, discussing books and ideas and the shape of the world, discovering the countless ways their minds aligned. But there were also new conversations now. Conversations about the future. "Have you thought about where you'd like to live?" James asked one afternoon as they walked the frost-covered paths of the formal garden. "I have estates in 3 counties, plus the London townhouse. You're free to prefer any of them." "I haven't even seen them." "We'll visit them all after the wedding. But if you have a preference for country or city, for society or solitude, I'd like to know." Eleanor considered the question. "I think I would like somewhere in between. I've had enough of London to last a lifetime, but complete isolation sounds lonely. Somewhere with neighbours, but not too many. Somewhere with space to breathe." "Thornwood, then. This estate is the most balanced, close enough to visit the city when required, far enough to avoid its worst excesses. And you already know the household." The household knows me as the woman who used to tell them to polish the silver. They'll adjust. Most of them already have. James caught her hand, drawing her to a stop beside a dormant rose bush. Mrs. Bell told me yesterday that she's never seen the staff so cheerful. Apparently, they're all delighted that one of their own has risen to such heights. They see it as a hopeful sign. A hopeful sign of what? That circumstances can change. That worth is not determined by birth alone. That even in this rigid hierarchical world, there is room for something like justice. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You give them hope, Eleanor. Don't underestimate the value of that. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Then I'll simply have to lend you some of mine until you find your own. The first visitors arrived exactly when the Dowager had predicted 5 days after the announcement, on a grey Thursday afternoon when Eleanor was in the middle of a fitting and entirely unprepared for company. Lady Ashworth and Miss Ashworth, the butler announced, his voice carefully neutral. They are waiting in the drawing-room. The Dowager rose from her chair with the smooth grace of long practice. Already? Well, we knew it would come. Eleanor, change into the green silk Madame Beaumont. You may finish later and meet me in the drawing-room in 15 minutes. James, you will attend us. Must I? You must. This is your fiancée's introduction to society, such as it is. You will be there to support her. 15 minutes later, Eleanor descended the stairs in a gown that had been hastily fastened, and hair that had been even more hastily pinned, her heart pounding with an anxiety she couldn't quite suppress. James met her at the bottom of the staircase, his presence steady and reassuring. You look lovely. I look terrified. Only to me. To everyone else, you look perfectly composed. He offered his arm. Remember, Lady Ashworth is a notorious gossip, and her daughter Sophia is the woman my mother originally announced I was engaged to. They will be looking for weakness. Don't give them any. Wonderful. No pressure at all. You've faced harder things than a pair of society ladies. You've survived poverty and loss and 6 years of service. What's one awkward tea compared to that? He was right, of course. But Eleanor couldn't help noticing that her hands were trembling as they approached the drawing-room door. Lady Ashworth was a formidable woman in her middle years, dressed in the height of fashion with jewels dripping from her neck and ears. Her daughter Sophia sat beside her, a pretty blonde with wide blue eyes and a mouth that seemed perpetually arranged in an expression of delicate injury. They rose as Eleanor and James entered, their curtsies correct, but their eyes sharp and assessing. Your Grace, Lady Ashworth said, addressing the Dowager with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How delightful to see you. We came as soon as we heard the happy news. I'm sure you did. The Dowager's voice was perfectly pleasant. May I present Miss Elellenena Whitmore, my son's intended bride. Eleanor, this is Lady Ashworth, and her daughter Miss Sophia. Eleanor curtsied, deeply grateful for the muscle memory that allowed her to perform the movement without thought. Lady Ashworth, Miss Ashworth, I'm honoured to make your acquaintance. Lady Ashworth's gaze swept over her with the thoroughness of an auctioneer assessing goods. Miss Whitmore, what a pleasure to finally meet the woman who has captured our dear Duke's heart. We have heard so little about you. That is hardly surprising, Lady Ashworth. I have lived quietly these past years. Indeed. And where was that, precisely? Eleanor felt James tense beside her, but she pressed on with a calm she didn't feel. In various places. I'm afraid my circumstances did not allow for society. No? Lady Ashworth's eyebrows rose. How mysterious. One might almost think you had something to hide. Mother. Sophia's voice was soft, reproachful. You promised to be civil. I am being civil, darling. I am simply making conversation. Lady Ashworth settled back onto the settee, arranging her skirts with elaborate care. "Do sit down, Miss Whitmore. I'm sure we'll become great friends, given enough time." The tea that followed was one of the most uncomfortable hours of Eleanor's life. Lady Ashworth probed and questioned, searching for weaknesses, while Sophia sat in wounded silence that spoke louder than words. James deflected what he could, and the dowager filled awkward pauses with practiced small talk, but Eleanor felt exposed and vulnerable beneath the scrutiny. When the visitors finally departed, she sank into a chair and pressed her hands to her face. "That was horrible." "That was nothing," the dowager said crisply. "Lady Ashworth is a single woman. Wait until you face a ballroom full of them." "Perhaps we could simply not face a ballroom full of them. Perhaps we could marry quietly and retire to the country forever." "An appealing notion," James said, "but impractical. We must be seen. We must demonstrate to society that we are neither ashamed nor afraid. Otherwise, the gossip will only intensify." "He's right," the dowager agreed. "We will hold an engagement ball here at Thornwood before the month is out. Everyone who is anyone will be invited, and you, my dear, will shine." Eleanor looked up at her, incredulous. "A ball? In less than a month? Your Grace, I can barely manage a tea service." "Then we have work to do." The dowager's smile was not unkind, but it was implacable. "Consider this the final examination, Eleanor. Pass it, and society will have no choice but to accept you. Fail, and the whispers will follow you forever." The preparations for the ball consumed every waking moment. Eleanor practiced dancing until her feet ached, memorized guest lists until names blurred together, rehearsed conversations until even her dreams were filled with polite small talk. The dowager drilled her relentlessly, critiquing her posture, her expressions, her tone of voice, but always with an undertone of affection that made the criticism bearable. "You have natural grace," the dowager said one evening, watching Eleanor execute a complicated turn in the empty ballroom. "And your conversation is intelligent without being pedantic. Those are rare qualities. You simply need confidence." "Confidence is rather difficult to manufacture." "Nonsense. Confidence is nothing but performance. You act as though you belong, and eventually you forget you are acting." "Is that what you did when you first entered society?" The dowager's expression softened. "My dear, I was a nervous wreck on my debut. I was convinced everyone was laughing at me, that I would say the wrong thing and disgrace my family forever. But I held my head high and smiled until my face ached, and eventually I discovered that I actually did belong, that the world I had feared was no more frightening than any other." "But you were born to this." "I'm trying to return to something I left behind years ago." "Which makes you stronger, not weaker. You know what it is to struggle, Eleanor. You know what it is to work and sacrifice and survive. Most of the people at that ball have never faced a single hardship in their pampered lives. Why should you be intimidated by them?" It was a reasonable question. Eleanor wished she had a reasonable answer. As the ball approached, something unexpected happened. Eleanor began to find her footing. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual one, built from small moments of success. A dinner with neighbouring gentry where she held her own in conversation. An afternoon call from a local lady who seemed genuinely pleased to meet her. A letter from a distant cousin of her mother's, long thought lost, expressing joy at the news of Eleanor's engagement. "You see," James said, reading the letter over her shoulder, "not everyone is Lady Ashworth. Some people are genuinely happy for you. One letter does not constitute universal acceptance." "No, but it's a start." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're doing beautifully, Eleanor. Better than you know." She wanted to believe him. Some days she almost did, but the doubts lingered, surfacing in quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts. She was not who they thought she was. She was not the poised, confident woman she presented to the world. She was a frightened girl playing dress-up, and sooner or later someone would see through the performance. The night before the ball, she couldn't sleep. She rose from her bed and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, intending to fetch a book from the library. But her feet carried her somewhere else, down the familiar servant's stair, through the silent corridors, to the small room in the attic where she had slept for 3 years. The door was unlocked. The room was empty now, her few possessions having been moved to the guest chamber weeks ago, but the moonlight through the window illuminated the narrow bed, the bare walls, the crack in the plaster she had traced with her eyes countless times. She sank onto the bed, and for a long moment she simply sat there, breathing in the familiar scent of the servants' quarters, wax and wood smoke, and something faintly musty. This was who she was. This cramped room, this narrow life, this daily struggle for survival. Everything else, the fine gowns, the dancing lessons, the engagement to a duke, was a dream from which she would surely wake. "I thought I might find you here." She looked up to find James in the doorway, dressed in a robe, his dark hair dishevelled from sleep. He looked impossibly handsome in the moonlight, and impossibly far away. "How did you know?" "I went to your room first. When you weren't there, I followed a hunch." He stepped into the tiny space, ducking slightly to avoid the sloped ceiling. "This is where you slept?" "For 3 years. It's very small." It was enough. Eleanor traced a finger across the worn blanket. "I was happy here in a way. I had purpose and routine and a place where I belonged. I knew exactly who I was and what was expected of me." James lowered himself onto the bed beside her, the frame creaking under his weight. "And now? Now I don't know anything. I don't know who I'm supposed to be or how to be her. Tomorrow night I'll stand in front of everyone who matters in this county and pretend to be someone I'm not, and they'll see through me, and everything will fall apart." "You're not pretending to be anyone." His voice was gentle but firm. "You're simply being all of who you are, instead of hiding parts of yourself away." "That's easy for you to say. You've always been the Duke of Thornwood. You've never had to become someone else." "Haven't I?" He laughed softly, without humor. "Eleanor, I've spent 7 years pretending to be a man without feelings, without needs, without any desire for connection. I've worn coldness like armor because it was easier than letting anyone close enough to hurt me. That mask, the Ice Duke, the man who doesn't care, that's the pretense. The person you see now, the one who laughs at your jokes and argues about books and wants nothing more than to spend every moment in your company, that's who I really am." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth of his words written in his eyes. "We're both pretending, then. We're both learning to stop." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Tomorrow night isn't a test, Eleanor. It's not an examination you can pass or fail. It's simply an evening during which you'll dance and make conversation and let people see who you are. Some of them will love you. Some of them will hate you. Most of them won't think about you at all after they leave. But none of that matters. What does matter? That you go to sleep tonight knowing that I love you, that my mother loves you, that the people in this household, the ones who actually know you, are honored to serve you." His grip on her hand tightened. "The rest is just noise, remember?" "Noise," she repeated softly. "Noise. And we'll face it together." She leaned into him, letting her head rest against his shoulder, and for a long moment they sat in silence in the tiny attic room where Elellenena Whitmore had learned to be invisible. "Will you do something for me?" she asked finally. "Anything. Dance with me. Here, now, before all the eyes and expectations. Just us." He rose and offered his hand with a formal bow that looked absurd in the cramped space. "It would be my honor, Miss Whitmore." There was no music, but they didn't need it. They moved together in the moonlight, turning and swaying in a space barely large enough to contain them, and Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. This was real. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever society thought of her, this James's arms around her, his heart beating against hers, this moment of quiet grace, this was true. "I love you," she whispered. It was the first time she had said the words aloud. They felt strange on her tongue, vulnerable and terrifying and absolutely right. James stopped dancing. His hands came up to frame her face, tilting it toward his. "Say that again." "I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do." "I love you, James." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and consuming, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the fear and hope and desperate longing that had been building inside her for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I have waited my entire life to hear someone say those words and mean them. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for seeing me. Always." He kissed her again, softer this time. "Now, we should both get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day." She let him lead her from the attic room, back down through the sleeping house, to the door of her guest chamber. He kissed her hand at the threshold, a gesture that was both formal and intimate, and she watched him disappear down the corridor before finally closing the door. Sleep came easier than she had expected, and her dreams were soft and warm and free of fear. The night of the ball arrived with crystalline perfection, cold enough to be seasonal, clear enough to reveal a sky full of stars. Carriages began arriving at dusk, their lanterns creating a river of light up the long drive to Thornwood Park. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her chamber, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Madame Beaumont had outdone herself. The gown was ivory silk overlaid with golden lace, cut to emphasize Eleanor's figure while remaining perfectly proper. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that incorporated tiny pearls, and around her neck hung a delicate gold necklace that had belonged to James's grandmother, his gift to her that morning, along with matching earrings that caught the candlelight when she moved. "You look like a duchess," Sarah said, her voice awed. "I look like someone pretending to be a duchess." "That's the same thing, miss. Begging your pardon." Eleanor laughed, despite her nerves. Sarah had a gift for cutting through pretension. A knock at the door announced James, resplendent in his evening clothes. He stopped on the threshold, his eyes widening. "Eleanor, I don't have words." "That must be a first." "I'm serious. You look extraordinary." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Are you ready?" "No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so we might as well proceed." "That's my girl." They descended the main staircase together, and Eleanor was acutely aware of the eyes that turned toward them, servants pausing in their duties, early guests craning for a glimpse of the mysterious fiancé who had captured the Duke. She kept her head high and her expression serene, channeling every lesson the Dowager had taught her. The ballroom was magnificent, transformed by hundreds of candles and elaborate floral arrangements into something from a fairy tale. Eleanor had supervised the preparation of this very room countless times, but she had never seen it like this, never been in the center of it, never been the reason for its splendor. The Dowager met them at the entrance, her face alight with satisfaction. "You look perfect, my dear, both of you." She took Eleanor's arm. "Now, remember, smile, be gracious, and let James handle anyone who becomes difficult. The first hour will be the worst. After that, they'll have found something else to gossip about." The first hour was indeed terrible. Eleanor smiled until her face ached, curtsied until her knees protested, and made polite conversation with an endless parade of strangers who regarded her with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Lady Ashworth held court in one corner, her loud voice carrying across the room with observations about certain people who didn't know their proper place. But there were also kind faces. Her elderly countess, who had known Eleanor's grandmother and spoke warmly of the family. A young baron's wife, who seemed genuinely interested in Eleanor's opinions rather than her origins. Several local families who had dealt with the Thornwood estate for generations and appeared pleased that the Duke had finally found someone to marry. And through it all, James remained at her side, solid and steady and unwavering. When the dancing began, he led her onto the floor with a possessiveness that sent a clear message to every observer. This woman is mine, and I will defend her against anyone who threatens her. You're doing beautifully, he murmured, as they moved through the figures of a country dance. I'm terrified. It doesn't show. Then the Dowager's lessons have paid off. They have. But Eleanor, you know this has nothing to do with lessons, don't you? You're holding your own because you're intelligent and capable and strong. All the dancing masters in the world couldn't teach that. She wanted to believe him, and for the first time, standing in the glittering ballroom with his arms around her and the music swelling through the air, she thought that perhaps she could. The crisis came, as crises do, without warning. It was nearly midnight. The ball was entering its final phase, the older guests beginning to make their farewells, while the younger ones showed no signs of flagging. Eleanor had excused herself to catch her breath, slipping through a side door onto a small balcony that overlooked the formal gardens. The cold air was a relief after the heat of the ballroom. She leaned against the railing, closing her eyes, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Miss Whitmore, or should I say, the future Duchess of Thornwood. Eleanor's eyes flew open. A man had followed her onto the balcony, Lord Bartholomew Crane, if she remembered correctly, a minor aristocrat with a reputation for gambling and gossip. He was handsome in a dissipated way, with the slightly unfocused look of someone who had been drinking heavily. Lord Crane, you startled me. Forgive me. I simply wanted a moment alone with the woman of the hour. He moved closer, his smile unpleasant. You've caused quite a stir, you know. Everyone is talking about you. People do enjoy talking. Indeed they do. And what they're saying is most interesting. He leaned against the railing beside her, too close for propriety. They're saying you appeared out of nowhere, that no one knows anything about your past, that the whole engagement seems rather convenient. Eleanor kept her voice level. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. His smile widened. You see, I have a talent for remembering faces, particularly pretty ones, and I could swear I've seen yours before. Her heart began to pound. Perhaps in passing. London is a small world. Perhaps, but I don't think it was London. He tilted his head, studying her. No, I'm quite certain it was somewhere else entirely, somewhere rather unexpected for a lady of quality. Lord Crane, I really should return to the ball. My cousin employed a maid several years back. Pretty girl, well-spoken, clearly above her station. I visited their house once and saw her on her knees, scrubbing the floors. His eyes glittered. She looked remarkably like you. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand there as her worst nightmare unfolded. It was you, wasn't it? Lord Crane laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet night. The Duke's perfect fiancée. The mysterious Miss Whitmore, she's nothing but a housemaid with delusions of grandeur. Lord Crane. I wonder what your precious Duke would say if he knew the truth. I wonder what society would say. He leaned closer, and she could smell the brandy on his breath. Then again, perhaps we could come to some sort of arrangement. I am a reasonable man, after all, and you are quite beautiful. Step away from my fiancé. James's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. He emerged from the doorway, his face thunderous, and for a moment Eleanor thought he might actually strike Lord Crane. "Thornwood!" Lord Crane straightened, some of his bravado fading. "I was just having a conversation with your charming bride-to-be." "I heard your conversation, all of it." James moved to Eleanor's side, positioning himself between her and Lord Crane. "You will apologize to Miss Whitmore immediately, and then you will leave this house and never return." "Apologize? For what? For discovering the truth about your little fraud?" "The truth." James's voice was ice. "The truth is that Miss Whitmore is the daughter of Henry Whitmore, a respected scholar and gentleman. The truth is that when her family fell on hard times, she did what countless gentlewomen have done throughout history. She sought honest employment rather than burdening others with her care. The truth is that she is the finest woman I have ever known, and I am honored that she has agreed to be my wife." "But she was a servant." "She was a lady who worked as a servant. There is a difference, though I wouldn't expect a man like you to understand it." James took a step forward, and Lord Crane took a corresponding step back. "Now, you will apologize, or I will personally throw you off this balcony. The choice is yours." Lord Crane's face went pale. Whatever he saw in James's eyes convinced him that the threat was genuine. I apologize, Miss Whitmore. I meant no offense. You will also leave this house immediately, and refrain from spreading any gossip about what you have or haven't learned tonight. If I hear even a whisper of scandal attached to Miss Whitmore's name, I will know exactly where it came from, and I will respond accordingly. You can't threaten me. I am the Duke of Thornwood. I can do whatever I please." James's smile was not pleasant. "Now get out of my sight." Lord Crane fled without another word. Eleanor released a breath she hadn't known she was holding, and found that her legs would no longer support her. She sank onto a nearby bench, trembling. "Eleanor!" James was beside her in an instant, gathering her into his arms. "Are you all right? Did he touch you? I swear, if he touched you—" "I'm fine. Shaken, but fine." She pressed her face against his shoulder. "James, he knows. He saw me, years ago, on my knees scrubbing floors. If he tells anyone, he won't. He's a coward and a drunk, and he knows better than to make an enemy of me." James's arms tightened around her. "But even if he does talk, it doesn't matter. I meant what I said. I'm not ashamed of who you are or what you've done. I'm proud of you. The scandal? There will be a scandal regardless. There was always going to be a scandal. A duke doesn't marry a woman no one's heard of without raising eyebrows." He pulled back to look at her face. "But scandals pass. What matters is what comes after. What matters is us." She stared at him, this man who had faced down a blackmailer without flinching, who had defended her past without a moment's hesitation. "You really don't care, do you? About society? About what people think?" "I really don't. I spent 7 years caring 7 years being the perfect duke, attending every function, following every rule, trying desperately to rebuild my family's reputation. And you know what it got me? Nothing. Loneliness and exhaustion, and the certainty that no one would ever see me as anything but a title." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Then you came along, and suddenly none of it mattered anymore. What society thinks doesn't matter. What Lady Ashworth whispers behind her fan doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is making you happy." "James," her voice broke on his name. "I don't deserve you." "Nonsense. You deserve far better than me, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, so you might as well accept it." She laughed through her tears and kissed him, right there on the balcony where anyone might see, and for once she didn't care about propriety or expectations or what anyone might think. When they finally broke apart, he helped her to her feet and straightened her gown, brushing away the evidence of her distress. "Now," he said, offering his arm, "shall we return to the ball? I believe we have some guests to scandalize." "Scandalize how?" "By being obviously disgracefully in love. It will horrify all the right people." She took his arm and squared her shoulders, feeling something new settling into place inside her. Something like strength, something like belonging, something like the first stirrings of the woman she was becoming. "Then let's give them something to talk about." The ball continued past midnight, but Eleanor remembered little of it afterward. What she remembered was James's hand in hers, his laugh in her ear, the warmth of his body beside her, as they danced again and again until the final guests took their leave. What she remembered was standing in the empty ballroom as the servants began to clean, looking around at the guttering candles and the wilting flowers, and feeling not exhaustion, but exhilaration. What she remembered was James's voice in the silence. "You were magnificent tonight." And what she remembered most of all was believing him. The next morning brought consequences. Eleanor woke late, her body aching pleasantly from hours of dancing. By the time she descended to breakfast, the Dowager and James were already there, deep in conversation that stopped abruptly at her entrance. "What's wrong?" James and his mother exchanged a glance. It was the Dowager who spoke. "Lord Crane has been talking." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. "I thought you said—" "I threatened him," James said grimly. But apparently his wounded pride outweighed his common sense. "He's been telling everyone who'll listen that you were a housemaid before you became engaged to me." The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor gripped the back of a chair for support. "What happens now?" "Now we weather the storm." The Dowager's voice was calm, but her eyes were worried. "The gossip will spread. There will be those who cut you, those who refuse to acknowledge you. It will be unpleasant. But—" Eleanor heard the word the Dowager hadn't spoken. "But it doesn't have to be fatal. Lord Crane's reputation is hardly spotless. Half of society knows him for a drunk and a gambler. His word carries little weight among those who matter. And James's defense of you last night was witnessed by several people who have already begun spreading a counter-narrative." "What counter-narrative?" "That you're a gentlewoman who fell on hard times and was taken in by the Dowager Duchess out of kindness. That your work as a servant was a testament to your character, not a stain upon it. That James fell in love with you despite your circumstances, or perhaps because of them." The Dowager smiled slightly. "The truth, in other words, simply presented in its most favorable light." "And people will believe that?" "Some will. Some won't. But in time, other scandals will arise, other gossip will circulate, and your past will fade into just another interesting story about how the Duke of Thornwood found his bride." The Dowager reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. "You have survived worse than this, my dear. You will survive this too." Eleanor looked between them, the Dowager with her fierce protectiveness, James with his steady determination. She thought of Lord Crane's sneering face, of Lady Ashworth's cutting whispers, of all the obstacles that still lay ahead. And then she thought of last night, the dancing, the laughter, the declaration of love on the moonlit balcony. "All right," she said. "Then let's weather the storm." The weeks that followed tested Eleanor in ways she had not anticipated. There were letters, some supportive, many cruel. There were social calls that felt more like interrogations. There were whispers that followed her wherever she went, conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. But there were also unexpected allies. The elderly countess who had known her grandmother became a vocal champion, publicly declaring that Eleanor was exactly the sort of woman the aristocracy needed. Mrs. Bell organized the household staff to stand united behind their former colleague, and their loyalty sent a powerful message about Eleanor's character. Even Lady Ashworth's daughter Sophia, surprisingly, approached Eleanor at a local assembly and offered a tentative olive branch. "I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control," Sophia said quietly, her pretty face serious for once. "My mother has always been ambitious on my behalf, and it has not always served me well. I wanted you to know that I bear you no ill will, Miss Whitmore. Truly." "Thank you, Miss Ashworth. That means more than you know." And through it all, James remained constant. He defended her at every turn, cutting anyone who dared to insult her, making clear to all of society that he considered her his equal in every way that mattered. When Eleanor doubted herself, he reminded her of her worth. When she faltered, he held her steady. When the weight of public scrutiny threatened to crush her, he shouldered it alongside her without complaint. "I wish you didn't have to do this," she said one evening, as they walked the frost-covered gardens. "Fight these battles on my behalf. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. But your reputation, my reputation is exactly what it should be. The Duke of Thornwood is a man who stands by the woman he loves, regardless of what the world thinks. If that damages me in the eyes of some, then those are eyes I don't care to impress. You're remarkably stubborn. I prefer determined, and you're one to talk." He caught her hand, pulling her to a stop. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. Before you, I was existing, not living. I was going through the motions of my position without ever actually feeling anything. You woke me up. You reminded me that there was more to life than duty and obligation and the endless performance of being a duke. James, I'm not finished. I love you, not despite who you are or where you came from, but because of it. Every struggle you've faced, every hardship you've overcome, they've made you the extraordinary woman you are today. I wouldn't change a single moment of your past, because it all led you here, to me." She felt tears slip down her cheeks, freezing in the cold air. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll marry me. Say you'll spend the rest of your life with me. Say you believe that we can face whatever comes together. You already asked me that, or rather your mother did. I'm asking you now, properly, this time." He dropped to one knee in the frost-covered garden, still holding her hand. "Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, will you marry me? Not because of an announcement in the Times, not because of scandal or expectation or anything except this. I love you, and I want you to be my wife." She looked down at him, this proud, stubborn, wonderful man who had seen past her disguise to the person beneath, who had defended her without hesitation, who had taught her to believe in herself again. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He rose and kissed her, and the cold of the winter night faded away into warmth. Later that night, Eleanor lay awake in her chamber, turning over the events of the past weeks in her mind. She had come so far from the frightened housemaid who had lit fires in the dark. She had faced society's scrutiny and survived. She had found love where she had least expected it. She had begun to believe that perhaps, after all, she did deserve happiness. But something still nagged at her, a feeling of incompleteness, of unfinished business. She rose from her bed and crossed to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens where James had proposed just hours ago. The frost glittered like diamonds on the formal hedges, and the sky was clear and full of stars. She thought about her mother, who had died believing her daughter would never know comfort again. She thought about her father, whose foolish investments had brought them to ruin. She thought about the girl she had been at 17, full of hope and expectation, and the woman she had become, harder, perhaps, but also stronger. Tomorrow she would wake and face another day of whispers and scrutiny. Tomorrow she would continue the slow work of building a place for herself in a world that did not quite know what to do with her. Tomorrow the struggle would go on. But tonight, in this quiet moment between one chapter of her life and the next, Eleanor allowed herself to simply be grateful. She had survived. She had found love. She had learned to stop hiding. Whatever came next, she would face it. The week before the wedding brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was in the morning room, reviewing the final arrangements with the dowager, when the butler appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely concealed alarm. "Your Grace, there is a gentleman here to see Miss Whitmore. He claims to be her uncle." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I have no uncle. He says his name is Gerald Whitmore, miss. He insists that he is your father's brother." Gerald. Her father's estranged younger brother, the one who had refused to help them when they had lost everything, the one who had turned his back on Eleanor's mother as she lay dying. "I don't want to see him." "Eleanor." The dowager's voice was gentle but firm. "Perhaps you should hear what he has to say." "I know what he has to say. He ignored us when we needed him most. He let my mother die in poverty rather than lift a finger to help. Whatever he wants now, I want no part of it. And yet he is here, which suggests he wants something." The dowager's eyes were shrewd. "Better to know what it is than to wonder." Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to send Gerald away without a word. But the dowager was right. Gerald had never shown any interest in Eleanor before his sudden appearance now, on the eve of her wedding to a duke, could not be coincidental. "Show him in," she said finally. "But send for James. I want him here." Gerald Whitmore was a small, thin man, with her father's colouring, but none of his warmth. He entered the morning room with an oily smile that set Eleanor's teeth on edge. "Eleanor, my dear, how wonderful to see you after all these years." "Uncle Gerald." She did not rise, did not offer her hand. "I wasn't aware you knew I was alive." "Of course I knew. I followed your progress with great interest." His smile widened. "And when I heard about your fortunate engagement, well, I knew I simply had to come and offer my congratulations in person." "How kind of you." Eleanor's voice could have frozen water. "Though I don't recall receiving any letters from you during the years I spent in service. Strange, if you were following my progress with such interest." Gerald's smile flickered. "Yes, well, there were complications, family matters that prevented me from reaching out as I wished." "What do you want, Gerald?" The question came from James, who had entered the room without Eleanor noticing. He moved to stand behind her chair, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Gerald's eyes darted between them, calculating. "I want only to reconnect with my niece, Your Grace. Surely there's nothing wrong with that. You abandoned her when she needed you most. You let her mother die in poverty. You have no claim on her now. I'm family. You forfeited that right years ago." James's voice was ice. "Now, I'll ask you once more. What do you want?" Gerald's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the petty, grasping man beneath. "Fine. I'll be direct. Your lovely fiancée is about to become one of the wealthiest women in England. I think it's only fair that her family shares in that good fortune." "You want money?" Eleanor laughed, though there was no humour in it. "Of course you do. I want what's owed to me. Your father left debts, Eleanor. Debts that affected the entire family. I was forced to sell properties, to endure hardship. My father's debts were his own. You refused to help him, refused to help us. Whatever hardships you faced are your own making." Eleanor stood, facing her uncle with a composure she hadn't known she possessed. "I owe you nothing, Gerald. Less than nothing. You will leave this house immediately, and you will not contact me again. You think you can just dismiss me? I'm your family. I could tell people—" "Tell them what? That you abandoned your brother's widow and orphan child? That you watched from a distance as your niece worked as a servant? Go ahead. Tell everyone exactly what kind of man you are." Eleanor stepped closer, and Gerald actually flinched. "I have nothing to hide anymore. Can you say the same?" Gerald's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough!" James's voice cut through the room like a whip. You will leave now, Mr. Whitmore, and if you ever approach my wife again, if you ever attempt to contact her or spread lies about her, I will destroy you. That is not a threat. It is a promise." Gerald looked between them, Eleanor with her spine straight and her eyes blazing, James with his barely contained fury, and whatever he saw convinced him that this was a battle he could not win. He left without another word. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor felt her knees give way. She would have fallen if James hadn't caught her, lowering her gently onto the settee. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't apologize. You were magnificent. I told him I had nothing to hide." She laughed shakily. "It's the first time I've ever believed it. Because it's true." James knelt before her, taking her hands. "Eleanor, you faced the worst of your past and didn't flinch. You defended yourself without hesitation. Do you understand what that means?" She looked into his grey eyes and saw herself reflected there, not the frightened housemaid, not the impostor in borrowed clothes, but the woman she was becoming. A woman with strength and grace, and a future worth fighting for. "It means I'm ready," she said, "to marry you, to face whatever comes next, to stop being afraid." "You were never afraid. Not really. You were just waiting for someone to remind you who you are." "And who am I?" He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his sharp features into something beautiful. "You're Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, scholar's daughter, survivor, the woman I love, and in 3 days you'll be the Duchess of Thornwood." She pulled him up onto the settee beside her and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, all the fear and hope and desperate love that had been building inside her for weeks. When they finally broke apart, she was crying again, but this time the tears were of joy. 3 days, she said. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And prepare yourself, because once you're my wife, I'm never letting you go." She believed him, and for the first time in 6 long years, Eleanor allowed herself to hope that the future might be even better than she had dared to dream. The morning of her wedding dawned grey and soft, the winter sky heavy with clouds that promised snow before nightfall. Eleanor woke before the household stirred, lying still in her bed as the first pale light crept through the curtains, and allowed herself a moment of quiet wonder. Today she would become a duchess. Today she would marry James. Today the journey that had begun in darkness and despair would reach its culmination in something she had never dared to imagine: love, acceptance, belonging. She rose and crossed to the window, pushing aside the heavy velvet to look out at the grounds of Thornwood Park. The formal gardens were bare in their winter sleep, the trees skeletal against the grey sky, but there was beauty in the starkness, beauty in the promise of spring that lay dormant beneath the frozen earth. A knock at the door announced Sarah, who entered with a tray of tea and toast and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Happy wedding day, miss, or should I say, Your Grace?" "Not yet," Eleanor smiled. "I'm still Miss Whitmore for a few more hours." "Not for long, though." Sarah set the tray on the bedside table and began bustling about the room, laying out the elaborate undergarments that would be required beneath Eleanor's wedding gown. "The whole household's been up since before dawn, making sure everything's perfect. Mrs. Bell's been crying since yesterday, says she never thought she'd see this day." "That makes 2 of us." "3, miss. I've done some crying myself, if I'm honest." Sarah paused in her work, her young face suddenly serious. "I hope you know how happy we all are for you. Not just because you used to be one of us, though that's part of it, but because you're good and kind and you deserve nice things. The Duke's lucky to have you." Eleanor felt her eyes sting. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." Now then. Sarah straightened her shoulders, resuming her brisk efficiency. We've got a lot to do, and not much time to do it. Her Grace says the hairdresser will be here in an hour, and Madame Beaumont's assistant is coming to help with the gown. You'd best eat something while you can. There won't be time later, and you don't want to faint at the altar. Eleanor laughed, and allowed herself to be swept up in the preparations. The hours that followed passed in a blur of activity. There were baths to be taken, hair to be styled, cosmetics to be applied with careful precision. The wedding gown, a masterpiece of ivory silk and seed pearls that Madame Beaumont had laboured over for weeks, was lifted over Eleanor's head with reverent care and fastened with tiny buttons that seemed to number in the hundreds. Through it all, the dowager supervised with an eagle eye, correcting a curl here, adjusting a fold of fabric there, ensuring that every detail was exactly as it should be. "You look beautiful," she said finally, stepping back to survey the finished result. "Absolutely beautiful. Your mother would have been so proud." Eleanor turned to the mirror and caught her breath. The woman who looked back at her was someone she barely recognized. The severe, invisible housemaid had vanished entirely, replaced by a creature of silk and light who seemed to glow from within. The gown emphasized her figure without being improper, its clean lines and delicate embroidery speaking of elegance rather than ostentation. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that incorporated her mother's pearl combs, retrieved from storage after the dowager had quietly purchased them back from the merchant to whom they had been sold, and her face, touched with just enough colour to enhance her natural features, looked almost ethereal. "I don't look like me," she whispered. "You look exactly like you." The dowager came to stand beside her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "This is who you always were, Eleanor. You simply forgot for a while." "I'm scared." "Of course you are. Every bride is scared on her wedding day." The dowager took her hand. "But you're also brave and strong and loved. Whatever happens out there, remember that. James loves you. I love you. And nothing, not gossip, not scandal, not the whispers of small-minded people can take that away." Eleanor squeezed her hand, drawing strength from the older woman's certainty. "Thank you. For everything. For recognizing me. For giving me a chance. For bringing James and me together. I don't know how to repay you." "Give me grandchildren." The dowager's eyes twinkled. "Several of them, if you please. I'm not getting any younger." Eleanor laughed, and some of her nervousness dissolved in the warmth of the moment. "Now," the dowager said briskly, "it's nearly time. The carriage is waiting, and James is already at the church, pacing like a caged lion according to the footman I sent to check. Shall we go make him the happiest man in England?" Eleanor took a deep breath, looked once more at the stranger in the mirror, and nodded. "Let's go." The village church was small and ancient, its stone walls having witnessed centuries of baptisms and weddings and funerals. Eleanor had attended services here countless times as a servant, sitting in the back pews with the rest of the household staff, invisible among the congregation. Today she would walk down the aisle as the bride, and the same people who had looked through her for years would watch her become a duchess. The irony was not lost on her. The carriage ride from Thornwood Park seemed to take both forever and no time at all. Eleanor sat rigid against the velvet cushions, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the familiar countryside pass by outside the window. Beside her, the dowager maintained a steady stream of calming conversation, discussing the menu for the wedding breakfast. The guests who had travelled from London, the arrangements for the honeymoon trip to the continent, but Eleanor heard very little of it. Her mind was fixed on what lay ahead, on the moment when the church doors would open and she would see James waiting for her at the altar, on the vows they would exchange, the promises they would make, on the life that would begin the moment she said, "I do." When the carriage finally stopped, Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Steady," the dowager murmured, squeezing her hand. "You've faced harder things than this." "Have I?" "You've faced poverty and loss, and the death of everything you knew. You've faced society's scrutiny, and your uncle's cruelty, and the whispers of people who wished you ill. A wedding is nothing compared to that. A wedding is everything." "Yes," the dowager smiled. "It is, which is why you mustn't let fear steal a single moment of it. This is your day, Eleanor, yours and James's. Whatever happens inside that church, whatever anyone thinks or says or does this day, belongs to you." The carriage door opened, and a footman appeared to help them down. Eleanor took his hand and stepped out into the grey December morning, her silk slippers crunching on the frost-covered path. The church loomed before her, its ancient doors standing open in welcome. Through the doorway she could see the warm glow of candlelight and the faces of the assembled guests turning to look. Somewhere in there, James was waiting. "Ready?" the dowager asked. Eleanor straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and stepped forward. "Ready." The walk down the aisle was the longest of Eleanor's life. Every eye in the church was upon her, watching, judging, assessing. She recognized faces in the crowd, friends and enemies, supporters and skeptics, people who wished her well, and people who hoped to see her stumble. Lady Ashworth sat in a prominent pew, her expression sour. Beside her, Sophia offered a small, encouraging smile. Mrs. Bell wept openly in the back row, surrounded by household staff who had been given the morning off to witness the ceremony. The elderly countess who had championed Eleanor sat near the front, her aged face beaming with satisfaction. But Eleanor barely registered any of them. Her entire being was focused on the man who waited at the altar. James stood tall and impossibly handsome in his wedding finery, his dark hair for once properly combed, his grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. As she drew closer, she saw that his hands were trembling slightly at his sides, and something in her settled at the realization that he was nervous too. She reached the altar, and the dowager stepped back to take her seat. James extended his hand, and Eleanor took it, feeling the warmth of his fingers close around hers. "You came," he whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought perhaps you'd come to your senses and flee to the continent." "Without you? Never." The vicar cleared his throat, and the ceremony began. The words washed over Eleanor like water, the ancient phrases that had joined countless couples throughout the centuries, the solemn vows and sacred promises. She spoke when she was meant to speak, responded when she was meant to respond. But her conscious mind was elsewhere. It was caught up in the sensation of James's hand in hers, the sound of his voice as he pledged himself to her, the look in his eyes that spoke more eloquently than any words. When the moment came to exchange rings, James slipped a band of gold onto her finger with hands that no longer trembled. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, his voice steady and sure. "With my body, I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods, I thee endow." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks as she repeated the words, placing her own ring on his finger. "With this ring, I thee wed. With my body, I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods, I thee endow." "Those whom God hath joined together," the vicar intoned, "let no man put asunder. I now pronounce you man and wife." The church erupted in applause, but Eleanor barely heard it. All she knew was James's arms around her, James's lips on hers, James's heart beating against her own as they sealed their union with a kiss. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying at the same time, joy overwhelming her so completely that she could hardly breathe. "Your Grace," James murmured against her ear. "What?" "You're a duchess now. I thought you should know. Good heavens. She looked down at the ring on her finger, at the church full of people waiting to congratulate them, at the life that had somehow become hers. So I am. James grinned a real grin, full of warmth and mischief and love. How does it feel? Eleanor considered the question. How did it feel? Terrifying. Wonderful. Impossible and inevitable all at once. It feels, she said slowly, like coming home. His eyes softened. Welcome home, then, Your Grace. And hand in hand, the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood walked back down the aisle to begin their life together. The wedding breakfast was held at Thornwood Park, in the great dining room that Eleanor had cleaned countless times as a servant. Now she sat at the head of the table beside her husband, accepting congratulations and well-wishes from a parade of guests who ranged from genuinely happy to barely concealing their disapproval. She found she didn't care about the disapproving ones anymore. Something had shifted inside her during the ceremony, some final wall crumbling away to reveal the person she had always been beneath. She was Eleanor Harcourt now, Duchess of Thornwood, wife to a man she loved desperately. The past, the poverty, the service, the years of invisibility no longer had the power to shame her. It had shaped her, yes. It had made her who she was. But it did not define her. Only she could do that. "You're smiling," James observed, leaning close to speak privately amid the noise of celebration. "Am I not supposed to smile at my own wedding?" "You're supposed to smile, but this is a different smile. You look peaceful." "I think I am peaceful, for the first time in a very long while." She reached for his hand beneath the table. "Thank you for this. For the wedding. For everything. For seeing me. For loving me. For giving me a reason to stop hiding. Eleanor." His voice was rough. "You never needed a reason. You were always worthy of being seen. I'm just grateful I was the one who got to show you." They were interrupted by the Dowager, who rose to make a toast that was equal parts heartfelt and sharply witty. Other toasts followed from friends, from family, from household staff who had been elevated to guests for the day. Mrs. Bell's contribution was largely incomprehensible through her tears, but was met with enthusiastic applause nonetheless. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to depart, Eleanor found herself standing at the window of the drawing-room, looking out at the grounds of what was now her home. The threatened snow had begun to fall, fat white flakes drifting down from the grey sky to blanket the world in white. "What are you thinking?" James appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "I'm thinking that this time last year I was probably lighting fires in this very room." She accepted the glass he offered. "And now I'm the mistress of the house. It's strange. Good strange or bad strange? Good, I think. Strange and wonderful and slightly terrifying." She turned to look at him. "James, are you sure about this? About me? There's still time to change your mind." "There has never been time to change my mind. From the moment I saw you in that library, debating Swift with such passion that you forgot to be afraid, I was lost." He set down his glass and took her face in his hands. "I love you, Eleanor. I will love you tomorrow, and next week, and next year, and until the day I die. Nothing you can say or do will change that. Please stop asking if I'm sure. I'm not used to being wanted. It will take some time to adjust. Then take all the time you need. We have the rest of our lives." She set down her own glass and rose on her toes to kiss him. He responded immediately, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless, until the snow and the guests and the weight of the world fell away, and there was nothing left but the two of them. When they finally broke apart, The Dowager was watching them from the doorway with an expression of profound satisfaction. "If you two are quite finished scandalizing my sensibilities," she said dryly, "the last of the guests are leaving, and I would like to say goodbye to my son before he runs off on his honeymoon." "Mother." James didn't release Eleanor, but he did turn to face the Dowager. "Thank you. For everything." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. The announcement, the meddling, the pushing us together at every opportunity. You engineered this entire thing, and I'm grateful." The Dowager's composure cracked slightly, revealing a glimpse of the loving mother beneath the sharp wit. "I only wanted you to be happy, James. Both of you. And when I saw how you looked at each other, I knew." "Knew what?" Eleanor asked. "That you were meant to be together. That you could save each other, if only given the chance." The Dowager crossed the room and took Eleanor's hands. "My dear, you have given me back my son. The real James, the one I thought I had lost years ago. For that, I will be eternally grateful." Eleanor felt tears threatening again. "You gave me back my life. I think we're even." "Nonsense. I simply recognized what was already there." The Dowager squeezed her hands and stepped back. "Now, the carriage is waiting to take you to London. You have a ship to catch tomorrow if you're going to make it to Paris by the new year." "We could delay," James began. "You will do no such thing. I have managed this household alone for 7 years. I think I can survive a few weeks without you." The Dowager shooed them toward the door. "Go. Be young and in love. See the world together. And when you come back, you can tell me all about it." James embraced his mother, and Eleanor saw both of them blinking back tears. Then he took Eleanor's hand and led her out into the snowy afternoon, where a carriage waited to carry them away to their new life. As they drove away from Thornwood Park, Eleanor looked back through the rear window at the great house growing smaller in the distance. Somewhere inside, the servants were cleaning up from the breakfast and gossiping about the remarkable turn their head housemaid's life had taken. Somewhere inside, the Dowager was already planning her next scheme, probably involving those grandchildren she had mentioned. Somewhere inside, Eleanor's old life was fading into memory. "Any regrets?" James asked. She turned back to face him, this man who had become her husband, her partner, her love. Not one. The honeymoon was a revelation. Eleanor had never been outside England, had never even dreamed of seeing the continent, and every new sight filled her with wonder. Paris in winter was magical, the wide boulevards dusted with snow, the elegant buildings glowing in the gaslight, the museums and galleries and theatres that seemed to overflow with beauty at every turn. They spent 2 weeks exploring the city, arm in arm, discovering its treasures together. From Paris, they travelled south to Italy, following the route that generations of English aristocrats had taken on their grand tours. Rome was ancient and overwhelming, its ruins speaking of civilizations long vanished. Florence was artistic perfection, every street corner offering some new masterpiece to admire. Venice was dreamlike, its canals and palaces seemingly floating on water. Through it all, Eleanor and James grew closer. They talked endlessly about books and philosophy and the future they were building together. They laughed at mishaps and marveled at wonders and created memories that would last a lifetime. And in the quiet hours of the night, in the privacy of their various hotel rooms, they discovered each other in ways that made Eleanor blush to remember. "I never knew," she whispered one night in Venice, lying in James's arms as moonlight filtered through the windows. "I never knew it could be like this." "Like what?" "Happy. Just happy. Without conditions or fears or the constant feeling that everything is about to fall apart. That's because nothing is going to fall apart." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I won't let it. You can't control everything." "No, but I can love you, and that will be enough." She believed him. For the first time in her life, she truly believed that happiness could last. They returned to England in late February, landing at Dover on a blustery day that felt worlds away from the soft Italian spring they had left behind. The crossing had been rough, and Eleanor spent most of it being sick over the rail, a misery that was only slightly offset by James's devoted attention. "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked for the 100th time as their carriage rattled north toward Thornwood. "You've been unwell for days now." "I'm fine. The channel is notoriously difficult, and I've never been much of a sailor. Still, perhaps we should stop at an inn, let you rest properly before continuing." "James," she caught his hand, "I'm fine. Truly. I just want to get home." Home. The word felt natural now, no longer strange on her tongue. Thornwood Park was home, and she was eager to return to it. But even as she reassured her husband, Eleanor was aware of a suspicion forming in the back of her mind. The sickness had begun in Venice, but she had attributed it to an unfamiliar dish. Then it had continued through their journey north, always worst in the mornings, always fading by afternoon. And her courses, she realized with a start, were late. Very late. She said nothing to James, not yet. Not until she was certain. But as the carriage carried them through the greening English countryside, she allowed herself to hope. Dr. Matthews confirmed her suspicion 3 days after their return to Thornwood. "Congratulations, Your Grace," he said, beaming at her with avuncular delight. "You're going to be a mother." Eleanor sat very still, her hands pressed to her still flat stomach. A mother. She was going to be a mother. There was a child growing inside her, a tiny life that was half hers and half James's, a miracle she had never dared to dream of. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be at this stage. You're perhaps 2 months along by my estimation. The babe should arrive in September, if all goes well." September. A baby in September. Her baby. Their baby. "Your Grace?" Dr. Matthews' voice was concerned. "Are you quite all right?" "I'm perfect," she said, and burst into tears. James reacted to the news with a joy so intense it was almost alarming. He wept, actually wept, tears streaming down his cheeks as he held her close and whispered his love and gratitude. He laughed, a sound of pure delight that rang through the halls of Thornwood Park. He spun her around until she begged him to stop, citing her delicate condition, and then he settled her on a sofa and fetched pillows and blankets and tea until she threatened to throw something at his head if he didn't calm down. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said, exasperated and amused in equal measure. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. There's no need for this much fuss." "There is every need. You're carrying my child, our child." He knelt before her, taking her hands. "Eleanor, I never thought when my father died, when everything fell apart, I thought I would never have this. A wife I loved, a family of my own. I had resigned myself to a lonely existence, and now I have everything I ever wanted." He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You've given me everything, Eleanor. I don't know how to thank you. You can start by letting me get up from this sofa. I have duties to attend to. Your only duty is to rest and grow our baby. I will go mad with boredom if I spend the next 7 months resting. Then I'll find ways to entertain you." His smile turned wicked. "I have several ideas along those lines." "James!" She swatted at his shoulder, but she was laughing. "The Dowager will hear you." "The Dowager will be too busy planning the nursery to notice anything else. In fact, I should probably tell her the news before she finds out some other way. She'll be insufferable about this, you know, crowing about how she was right all along." "Let her crow. She was right." James kissed her properly then, long and thorough and full of promise. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said simply, "for all of it, for loving me, for marrying me, for giving me this." "Thank you for seeing me," she replied, "when no one else did." They stayed like that for a long moment, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air, two people who had found in each other the completion they had both been seeking. Then James rose and went to tell his mother the happy news, and Eleanor leaned back against the pillows and allowed herself to dream of the future that was now unfolding before her. The months that followed were both challenging and joyous. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed well, though the early sickness gave way to fatigue and a seemingly endless array of peculiar cravings. James hovered constantly, alternating between excitement and anxiety, and the dowager took charge of preparing the nursery with the same military precision she had brought to Eleanor's social education. "The child will want for nothing," she declared, surveying the room that had been transformed with silk curtains and hand-painted furniture and enough toys to stock a small shop. "I have already engaged the finest nurse in England, and I expect my grandchild to be the most brilliant and beautiful baby ever born." "What if it's ugly?" Eleanor asked, amused. "It won't be, not with parents like you and James. The child will be perfection itself." Eleanor hoped so. She hoped for many things, in those quiet months of waiting, that the baby would be healthy, that she would be a good mother, that she could give her child the love and security she had lost so young. She spent hours in the library, reading everything she could find about childbirth and infant care, preparing herself for the journey ahead. James found her there one afternoon, surrounded by books, and sank into the chair beside her with an expression of bemusement. "You know the nurse will handle most of this. I want to understand it myself. I want to be prepared." "You're already prepared. You're the most competent person I know." "I was a housemaid, James. I know how to polish silver and light fires. I don't know how to raise a child." "No one knows how to raise a child until they have one. And then they learn." He took the book from her hands and set it aside. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Eleanor. I have no doubt of that." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. Because I've seen how you care for people, how you notice what they need and quietly provide it. Because you have more love in you than anyone I've ever met." He cupped her face in his hands. "Our child is going to be so loved, Eleanor, so completely and utterly loved. That's all that really matters." She wanted to believe him. Most days she did. But the old fears still surfaced sometimes, whispering that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve this happiness, that something would inevitably go wrong. She was learning to ignore those whispers. It got easier with time. The baby arrived on a golden September afternoon, after a labor that was long and difficult, but blessedly free of complications. Eleanor gripped James's hand through the worst of it, drawing strength from his presence, and when the midwife finally announced, "It's a girl," she wept with exhausted joy. They named her Mary Catherine, after both grandmothers, Eleanor's mother and James's grandmother, the woman whose pearls Eleanor had worn on her wedding day. She was small and red and impossibly perfect, with a crown of dark hair and grey eyes that would someday be her father's. "She's beautiful," James breathed, cradling his daughter with the careful reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious. "Eleanor, look at her. She's beautiful. She looks like you. She looks like herself. A perfect, unique little person." He sat on the edge of the bed, positioning the baby so Eleanor could see her face. "Our daughter. I still can't quite believe it." "Neither can I." Eleanor touched the baby's soft cheek, marveling at the tiny perfection of her features. "Hello, Mary. I'm your mother. I've been waiting so long to meet you." The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, and turned her head toward Eleanor's voice. Something broke open in Eleanor's chest, a feeling so overwhelming that she couldn't name it, couldn't contain it, couldn't do anything but surrender to its force. This was love, she realized. Not the love she felt for James, which was powerful and transformative in its own right, but something different, something primal and unconditional and fierce beyond measure. She would die for this tiny creature. She would kill for her. She would move heaven and earth to ensure her happiness. "I understand now," she whispered. "Understand what? Why my mother did what she did. Why she gave up everything to try to save me." Eleanor looked at James, tears streaming down her face. "I would do the same. I would do anything for her." "So would I." James's voice was rough with emotion. "We'll protect her, Eleanor. We'll give her everything she needs. She'll never know want or fear or loneliness." "We can't protect her from everything. The world isn't safe." "No, but we can give her a safe place to come home to, a family that loves her without condition." He pressed a kiss to Eleanor's forehead. "That's what you've given me. It's what we'll give her." The baby began to fuss, and Eleanor guided her to her breast, marveling at the instinct that knew exactly what to do. Mary latched on immediately, her tiny mouth working, and Eleanor felt a peace settle over her that was deeper than any she had known. She had a daughter. She had a husband who loved her. She had a home and a family and a future that stretched out before her like a golden road. The frightened housemaid who had lit fires in the darkness was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had found her way into the light. 8 years later, Eleanor stood at the window of the library at Thornwood Park, watching her children play in the snow-covered gardens below. Mary, at 8, was the image of her father, dark-haired and grey-eyed, and possessed of a sharp intelligence that sometimes startled the adults around her. She was currently engaged in building a snow fort with the help of her younger siblings, Henry, age 5, who had inherited his mother's honey-coloured hair and gentle temperament, and little Catherine, just 3, who was more interested in eating snow than building with it. "They'll catch cold," the dowager said from her position by the fire. She was older now, frailer, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and her tongue just as wicked. "They'll be fine. Children need fresh air and exercise even in winter." That sounds like something a mother who used to be a housemaid would say. It's something a mother who knows her children would say. Eleanor turned from the window with a smile. "They've been cooped up inside for days because of the weather. If I don't let them run off some energy, they'll destroy the house." The dowager chuckled. "They're spirited, I'll grant you that. Mary particularly. She reminds me of James at that age, always questioning everything, always pushing boundaries. She gets that from both of us, I think. Yes, you're both dreadfully obstinate. It's why you suit each other so well." The dowager set down her tea. "Speaking of my son, where has he disappeared to?" "Estate business. Something about the tenant cottages that needed his attention." Eleanor returned to her seat and picked up her embroidery, a pastime she had taken up during her first pregnancy and grown to love. "He should be back for tea." They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant shrieks of the children at play. Eleanor let her mind wander, as it often did in quiet moments, over the extraordinary path that had led her here. 8 years. 8 years since that fateful morning when the Duke had appeared in the library and changed everything. 8 years since the Dowager's outrageous announcement had set in motion a chain of events that still seemed impossible when she considered them. She was the Duchess of Thornwood now, a title that had once seemed as remote as the moon. She sat on charity boards and hosted elegant dinners, and was consulted on matters of fashion and social etiquette by younger ladies who had no idea she had ever been anything other than an aristocrat. The gossip about her past had faded years ago, replaced by newer, more interesting scandals. Now she was simply the Duke's wife, mother to his children, mistress of his estate, so thoroughly integrated into the role that even she sometimes forgot the servant she had been. But not always. Sometimes, when she passed a housemaid in the corridor or watched the footman serve at dinner, she remembered. She remembered the ache of tired muscles and the weight of constant worry and the careful invisibility that had been her armor against the world. She remembered, and she made sure that the servants in her household were treated with dignity and respect, paid fairly, given adequate time off, never spoken to with cruelty or contempt. "You're thinking deep thoughts," the Dowager observed. "I can always tell." "I was thinking about how different my life is now than it was 8 years ago, and how grateful I am for all of it. Even the difficult parts? Especially the difficult parts. They taught me who I am." The Dowager nodded slowly. "You've become a remarkable woman, Eleanor. Not that you weren't always, but you've grown into yourself in a way that's beautiful to see. I had help, a great deal of help. You had opportunity. The rest you did yourself." The Dowager reached out and patted Eleanor's hand. "I'm proud of you, my dear. Proud of the wife you've been to my son, the mother you've been to your children, the Duchess you've become. When I'm gone, don't talk about that. I'm 83 years old, Eleanor. I must talk about it sometime." The Dowager's eyes were gentle. "When I'm gone, you must promise me that you'll take care of James. He still needs you more than he likes to admit." "I'll always take care of him, and he'll always take care of me. That's what marriage is. Yes, that's exactly what marriage is." The Dowager smiled. "My son is a lucky man. I hope he knows it. He tells me so every day. Good, as it should be." The door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a flurry of snow-covered children. Mary led the charge, her cheeks red with cold and her eyes bright with excitement. "Mama, we built the most enormous fort. Come and see." "I'm going to get sick," Henry announced cheerfully. "Miss Patterson said so." "I ate snow," Catherine proclaimed, as though this were a significant achievement. Eleanor laughed and allowed herself to be pulled from her chair, bundled into a coat, and dragged out into the winter afternoon. The fort was indeed enormous, a surprisingly sophisticated structure for something built by children, and she dutifully admired every snow brick and carefully crafted window. "You'll defend it against invaders," Mary instructed. "Henry, you're on her team. Catherine, you're with me." "What invaders?" Eleanor asked. "Father, of course. He's coming across the lawn right now. Look." Eleanor turned and saw James approaching from the direction of the tenant cottages, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. The children shrieked with delight and began packing snowballs, and Eleanor found herself doing the same, caught up in the infectious joy of the moment. The battle that followed was epic. Snow flew in all directions, alliances shifted without warning, and by the end, everyone was soaked and laughing and thoroughly exhausted. James caught Eleanor around the waist and pulled her behind the remnants of the fort, pressing a cold-nosed kiss to her cheek. "This is your fault, you know," he said. "Before you came along, I was a dignified duke who would never dream of having a snowball fight with his children. Before I came along, you were a lonely duke who had forgotten how to laugh. I think I'm an improvement. A vast improvement. The best decision I ever made." He kissed her properly this time, ignoring the chorus of disgusted protests from their children. "I love you, Eleanor. I love you too. Thank you for this life, for this family, for every single moment of the last 8 years." "Thank you for seeing me," she said, as she had said so many times before, when no one else did. They stood there in the snow, surrounded by their children's laughter, and Eleanor felt the full weight of her happiness settle around her like a cloak. She had been invisible once. She had been nobody, nothing, a ghost moving through a world that refused to acknowledge her existence. She had believed that her life was over, that happiness was something other people experienced, that the best she could hope for was survival. But James had seen her. He had looked past the grey dress and the severe hair and the downcast eyes, and he had seen the woman beneath. He had loved her, not despite who she was, but because of it. He had given her a home and a family and a future worth living, and she had given him the same. "Papa!" Mary's voice rang across the snow-covered garden. "Come see the inside of our fort." "I'm coming," James called back, and offered Eleanor his arm. "Shall we?" She took his arm and let him lead her toward their children, toward their life, toward all the years that still lay ahead. The Duke had smiled at a housemaid once, and nothing had been the same since. But that was not quite the truth, Eleanor reflected. The Duke had smiled at a woman who had forgotten her own worth, and in doing so he had reminded her of who she truly was. Not a maid, not a duchess, just Eleanor, flawed and strong and loved, and that in the end was enough.